So whatever. All right. You're live for whomever.
Hello.
So here we are again. All right. So at this point, I don't think you really need introduction. By now, you've been haunting YouTube for a decade.
I think
So
haunting is a very appropriate verb.
yes. Depends on who you ask, but I'm going to use that term. So if anything, I probably need more introduction than you do. But it doesn't
So
matter.
everyone, this is Jason, Porcupine Jason. He runs a fantastic YouTube channel. I recommend everyone tune in and watch his videos, talking about socionics, introducing some key concepts, and also analyzing some of my videos, which I greatly appreciate.
So thank you everyone for that introduction. Thank you. Thank you. So one of the main points that I wanted to really jump on right away is focusing more on the practical, the
Yeah,
applicational side of socionics.
yeah,
One of the things that I think happens a lot is there is a constant back and forth on theory. Lots
hmm,
of people arguing constantly over charges, Renin dichotomies, and whose model is better. And at the end of the day,
yeah,
the most important question is, what does it all matter? How does this help anybody? I think this is also especially important for deltas and for gammas, who are by their nature TE oriented. So
hmm,
to them, they're really thinking, why should I bother? If I'm an FI Dom, I'm already good with people. Why should I care about socionics? What can socionics provide? So I think that's the first question to then roll on into the next set of questions. But let's start there. What do you say to that, Jack?
okay. So one of the things I've been trying to do is develop that practical application of socionics. I am one of the few people in the socionics community to also be a psychologist, and I utilize socionics when I'm practicing business psychology. I'm not a healthcare professional. I don't have patients. Some people think I have patients. I don't have patients. I'm not a shrink, but I do a mix of um, personality assessment, often for recruitment and promotion in quite large organizations. But also, I do a bit of coaching and just feedback sessions, a lot of candidates. So for me, typology has been very useful to pick out from some information um, other key insights about the person. It provides that inductive or inferential reasoning, which you can't quite get from just looking at someone's traits. If I look at someone, I can see they're clearly focusing on extroverted logic, and I can sort of piece together that they are fitting an LIE. Then I can dive into talking to them about how they use introverted ethics, and it clicks, and it works in the coaching session. So from gauging in someone's strengths in a promotion interview, where of course I want to tell you their strengths, I want to dwell on their weaknesses. Later in the feedback session, I know what those weaknesses are likely to be, and I can dive into those. So I found that immensely valuable. It's enabled me to get a picture of a person, just a caricature, a portrait, a few scraps of data, and from that piece together something which is both insightful and helpful. It's a good source of value add. Um, Other ways in which I've been trying to use sociomics is actually outside of my main role. Um, I've had a bit of a stint as a sort of matchmaker. I'm part of this. I can't mention the dating agency. I'm their secret source, you could say. So I'm not allowed to talk about. Well, I'm not allowed to mention in the dating agency what I use, and no one's allowed to know that I am in this particular dating agency. So I shan't mention the particular dating agency. But they are
Mm.
using socionics as their secret source to do the matches. Um, the idea is that there is data behind the bringing together of people who have high strengths diversity, so very good at different things, but who have very low values diversity, so appreciate the same things in life, think the same things are important, are on the same page. that shows up in a lot of research into good teamwork. So extrapolating that principle, or those dual principles, and applying that to relationships is what I've been trying to do. And socionics matches that. It embodies those principles in its duality.
Okay,
So I've been using that.
Let me jump right in there on that, because that's
Sure.
too juicy to just sit here waiting for that one. So
Sure.
without going into too much, obviously you have certain rules that you can't divulge. Let me start with this.
Yeah.
Usually when it comes to duality, one of the issues that pops up is that your dual is obviously someone you can tell is different from you. So there may be a natural inclination to think to yourself, you know what, I don't want to date this person. They're different than me. Why would I want to do that?
Yep.
So how are you getting around that?
Well, when you say how am I getting around that, or you mean so for a right? Okay, so I'm talking to a candidate, someone who's going forwards in this dating agency. I'll tell them that I'm not going to give you the easiest, quickest hookup. I'm saying if you're looking for a long-term relationship that has the greatest chance of success in a world where there is so much divorce, and even after the divorce, a lot of people don't even get married anyway. Tumbling marriage rates, tumbling birth rates. So for me, it's about, at the end of the day, if you're in this for the long term, ideally you want to have children, and that's going to be tough. You've got challenges you've got to face together. So you've got to think of it like a team. And a good team has these same qualities. So it's not about the relationship where someone is exactly the same as you. People tend to start off dating people quite similar to themselves, and it's easy to click. This is about getting to know someone very different from you and learning to appreciate this a completely other side, and finding you actually have a lot of things in common in terms of your values. So it's not easy, but if you're looking for a long-term relationship, it shouldn't really be easy. It should be rewarding and fulfilling in the long run. So it's about having a straight conversation with them and getting a sense of what they're looking at here. What are their priorities in going on these dates? If it's a quick hookup, probably the pursuit of duality is pretty much a waste of time. That's not really the value add's not going to be there.
How often do you find people are receptive to this kind of straight conversation? This idea that this person is not obvious, doesn't appear to be a match for you, but trust me, let's stick with it, work on this, and you'll see how it plays out. How many people do you find are really receptive?
Well, given the amount of money that's circulating around, I think they're usually quite willing to be taking this seriously.
Especially if it's somebody who's paying and entering into this service, they've already mentally decided, I'm going to be open-minded to whatever you've got to say, and so on.
Yeah. So as long as you speak in a way which shows you believe in what you're talking about, I think people tend to, even if they aren't immediately sold, they give you the benefit of the doubt. I mean, plus this is coming from at least anecdotal personal experience, and it's coming from what we could see in the data on, as I said, different kinds of diversity and how they match up. It makes sense to say that if you see a marriage as teamwork, I mean, very few people would disagrue with that.
Well, true, but that seems like it's coming from a wiser place. You imagine the young person is I want someone fun, someone who has certain traits and qualities. And I mean, team, I'm not looking for a team. I'm looking for love. I'm looking for a Hallmark card, and then you have to try to talk your way through that.
True. But okay, so the kind of dating agency I'm with, these are people in their 40s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're in your 20s, if you're not going to go on a dating agency, you're going to go on Tinder. And fine, go on Tinder.
Oh, but I see. So that does make quite the difference, though, the age demographic you're playing with already.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
You probably even have a number of people who've already been in failed marriages or relationships and all that.
Yep.
So, okay. Do you happen to have any statistics that come from this dating agency?
Not yet. It's early days. It's very early days. I'm not going to claim we have something we don't. It really is at the moment proof of concept. And yeah, in terms of other forms of proof of concept, I've certainly advised on the matching of people who I think are duals who are actually quite a bit younger. And so far, it's had a relatively high engagement rate and marriage rate. The only problem is it's quite a small sample, mostly of people related to me. So, it's not exactly solid.
Why did you say that this company is using Socionics, but is keeping that kind of quiet? Like, why the need to keep it quiet?
I think it's perhaps because they don't see, they think it's something which if someone else knew about, they could easily steal it. But practically speaking, I don't think it's actually necessary, because even if someone knew it was Socionics, no one's going to be able to steal that. That the expertise is here. It's not. I mean, unless they've taken my course and then still within practice for a good amount of time, maybe then. But someone who's just looking online to sort of run off with the idea and set up a dating agency. I mean, yeah, I don't. I think it's. I don't think it's entirely necessary, to be fair.
Yes, which would bring to other areas on. There's a lot of people who like to jump into Socionics very quickly, and you can kind of see what I would call they're chasing fool's gold.
Yeah.
They're using methods and things that just should not be touched with if you have any sense. Diving too quickly into Renin dichotomies and other things like that. It's like, bad idea. Don't start there.
True. Don't start there. I agree, don't start. I mean, to be fair, as soon as you start talking about quadras, you're dealing with Renin dichotomies. The problem is to be as specific as possible. It's not necessarily Renin dichotomies that the problem. I think that you can't get very far without Renin dichotomies. I think the problem is instead simply taking the definitions as read on Wikisocion or whatever else. That, right, I think is the problem. But yeah, you can't get very far. You won't have, you don't, without Renin dichotomies, you've just got before Jungian dichotomies. So you wouldn't have Mary serious, you wouldn't have judicious decisive, you wouldn't have quadras.
Well, I think what I'm trying to say with that is the same as what you're getting at, which is that when you first enter and you start looking at Wikisocion, or you look at whatever site you want and you dive into Renin dichotomies, many of the definitions don't make sense right away. It takes a long time to figure that out. You're more likely to get confused and now mistype people because of that.
True.
As examples that have been discussed at length, like you can get into tactical versus strategic and carefree versus farsighted. And when you start looking at it, a lot of things don't make a lot of sense.
Yes.
So it takes a long time to sort that out. So my point is that for new people, focusing more on the quadra values, what are the values that the person cares about? Now that you have that quadra, then you can dive into which elements are on top. What is it that they're using more? What are they using less? Where's the deficits, etc.? Now we can figure out what the type is. After that, you can now start diving into Renin dichotomies and start figuring that out, how that plays a role, but not before, and probably not at the same time, because you're more likely to go wrong. And once you screw that part up, everything else afterward is just going to be a mess. So now, since we were on the relationship thing, an old-fashioned concept, I don't know if you still think about this or care anymore, but there's always been this thing. I think it's more of a Model G kind of approach of the romantic styles. Like the SE ego types are going to be the more initiating and sexually aggressive and so on. And NI is more passive, welcoming. Then you get into victim and all the other stuff. Do you still agree with any of that?
It's not a question of agreeing or disagreeing. I think it's built on things which I think makes some amount of common sense, but I think takes it a bit further than common sense would allow. So simply saying that someone's an extrovert sensation, therefore they're an aggressor, someone's introvert, they are a victim. Okay, that there is an element of truth in that. You could perhaps see it a lot more in, say, an SLE and an IAI, right? It'll get a lot more convoluted when you start looking at it in terms of the gamma type pairings.
Oh yeah.
And what that looks like. So in the same way, caregiver, infantile, it kind of works perhaps best with an ILE and an SEI. But even then, it's not. No, I think it actually works better, caregiver SEI, probably with ESE and LII, I'd actually say, in terms of the way it's described, and sort of the ESE looking after the LII. I think that actually, LIs need more looking after than ILEs actually do. ILEs just need to be reminded just to sort of relax. Sort of brought back down to earth. So yeah, there's a kernel of truth, and I think I think Gilenga sort of ran away with that kernel of truth when it came to the romance styles. So it's like a funny thing to look through, right? It's good to know. I wouldn't put so much stock in it, but it's based on things which, yes, you should be looking for. You should be looking for introverted sensing, in the ego, etc.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of the way I view it too. It's once again theory taken too far, which back to the point of all of this. So anyway, since we're running off on this stuff, so what could you say when it comes to, since you're basically industrial psychology, that's what I would assume really.
That's the American term, yeah.
What would you say is the application of socionics there in your experience? How do you normally use it?
Well, this is where I think it's perhaps closer to what the research is suggesting, which is team building.
Right.
Team development. But also, a key aspect here is that, let's say you go into an organization and the team isn't completely composed of duals, or not entirely in the same quadrant. You can't simply say, right, these members of the team have to go. Instead, it's about utilizing your understanding of type to actually better bridge those differences. So you can do a mixture of one-on-one coaching sessions. You can do bridging sessions, team development sessions. You get everyone in the room and they talk out their issues. And you can also use techniques to draw attention to differences in communication style. One of the things which I've learned, which is very effective, is learning to separate your facts and your feelings from each other, rather than leaning into judgments. Judgments are basically expressing your feelings as if they are facts. And that's a very common issue with the extroverted ethics types. So making sure the extroverted ethics types are mindful of this, actually, it goes a long way in not getting other people's backs up when they're giving feedback.
So I can see that's why those types might be typed as TE dominant types. Because the FE, as you're saying, is coming across in a way like, this is a fact, this is my judgment, this is my opinion. It's like, it's not really a fact. It's just how you feel about it.
It's a charged emotion, but it becomes an overwhelming generalization. Like, you always do this. That kind of thing happens quite a bit. If an extroverted ethics leading type is upset, they'll say all sorts of stuff like that.
Was this something you wanted to get into right away? This career path in industrial psychology? That's exactly what you were gunning for?
Well, right away, I can't say that. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do after school. I wanted to essentially access as many things as possible. So I thought I'd go to the root of all things. So I actually did philosophy for my BA. It was later when I started thinking about application. I always had a passion for typology since I was around, let's say 16. Yeah, 15 is when it started, but then I sort of forgot about it. And I sort of rediscovered it. I was like 16 going on 17. Yeah, that's when I had the passion really took hold. Across university as well. People kept saying, why didn't you go into psychology? So I did. But yeah, and then I was thinking where to go in psychology. I don't think I'm really the sort of person to be a healthcare professional. But I did realize that the field in which typologies were put to the test was really in business psychology. That's where the Myers-Briggs type indicator was used. So that's really the arena to compete in.
So on this pathway, it was a practical decision on your part. After philosophy, someone just said you should do G, and you said, sure. Is that pretty much it?
Well, not just someone, like multiple people. I probably had around, I say, at least 10 different people say the same thing to me.
It's funny. I feel like I had the same thing happen to me, except I ignored them all.
Yeah.
Um,
I guess. Okay. Why did you ignore them all?
Well, in my case, the area specifically that I hear a lot of people bring up, psychology is one of them. Even to this day, a lot of people, for obvious reasons. And the other is teaching. They're always like, you ought to go be a teacher, a professor of something, and whatever, and so forth.
Yeah.
You'd be great at it. And it's like, yeah, I know, but that's not interesting to me. In fact, this might somehow tie into like a demonstrative function or something like that, where, yes, I understand I could do those things and I could probably do them easily. I just don't find it fulfilling enough. I feel like I'm not going far enough in what I. And those kind of careers for me are more like I'll think about it later. I have a few other goals I need to get to first, and then maybe in my retirement phase, I'll move into teaching and be a professor of something.
It makes sense. It makes sense, especially as you. So you have ambitions, and being a teacher is not exactly lining up to those ambitions. So it's something to turn to later.
Right. And at the same time, it's just realizing that you have different phases of life.
Yeah.
You can always be a teacher at any phase. Even in your retirement years, you're 65, 70 years old, you can teach.
Yeah.
There's certain other things you can't do once you've reached that age.
Yeah.
So take advantage of those things now while you still have a shot at them is kind of the way I look at it.
That makes a little sense. Yeah, different to me, because me is about finding some kind of commercial application, because there's none of that in philosophy. So this was, it made complete sense, but this was the commercial application.
Well, I've had that issue as well. We're just trying to find what is the commercial application. And ironically, it's one of those areas I'm like, commercial application? It's usually not the forefront of my mind either. It's not difficult to figure out, but it's not something that I generally find all that exciting either. That's one of those areas where when it talks about gammas and the idea that gammas always love money, they're always chasing money. It's like, are they? I don't think so. To me, that's not what really they do. A lot of them do it. Yes. Is it really the driving force? I disagree. To me, it's more achievement, independence, freedom to achieve those goals, whatever they might be. And those goals might not always be money. Maybe you want to be a scientist, or you want to be a politician, or you want to do something else. It's not really about making money.
Yep. People confuse the sign for the thing which lies underneath. So money is a sign. Money is a symbol. It represents value. So, that is a very common way of quantifying achievement. But that's not the only way of quantifying achievement.
It's also not taking into account that money, if you have a lot of it, represents a certain freedom. I have a lot of money, so I don't have all these issues. So now my time is my own. I can do what I want.
Yeah.
I'm not bothered by anyone because I could throw whatever money I need at any problem that happens to come up.
Yeah.
So again, it's back to it's freedom, it's independence that you're after, and achievement. It's not the money in and of itself. So it's one of those little stereotypes that always drives me nuts.
It makes sense. But people turn to stereotypes. If they're not used to understanding the nuances behind it, they'll just deal with the surface, which is the money grabbing.
Yep.
Scrooge McDuck.
So on the okay, so you went into industrial psychology.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What's a day-to-day thing for you with that?
Well, interesting to say, because I'm actually kind of in the midst of entering a new job. I'm sort of just on I can't quite call it a garden leave. It's more just a bit of annual leave before I actually finish and start the new job. But essentially, my job at the moment has been a mix of designing tests, designing a test user training course I'm working on recently. But the part which I enjoy the most is interviewing and then doing feedback sessions with candidates. These are usually very senior candidates, people going for managing director roles at a very large international bank. So usually it's a 2.5 hour conversation with these people. They're usually in their, I'd say, late 40s, 50s, sometimes on rare occasions early 60s, basically aiming at the top of their career. And you basically get to talk to them for that period of time, and you get to know them, get them to relax. Because the first half hour they've got their front up usually, but after the half hour they relax and you start to hear different things. And they start to tell you more things they wouldn't have told you at the beginning of the conversation, and that is a good material for me to utilize typology with. I utilize other things as well, not just the typology. I utilize a competency, sort not quite well, almost an abstraction of all competency frameworks called the RDMP model, which basically looks at how people manage relationships, how they diagnose information, how they manage various processes, including their own work, and how they act in a professional, ethical manner. So it links up quite well to overlaps with parts of socionics. So then I write a very long report on them, which usually gets read by someone even more senior. And then it's decided, not purely based on my input, but usually they already made up their mind, but it's an extra cog in the wheel. So sorry, extra cog in the system. Then decide whether to promote them or not, or recruit them to the role or not, if it's a recruitment. And then I get to have a feedback session afterwards with the person. And that's really my favorite part. I get to, the trying to get the job, trying to get the role has passed now. And now it's just about what we've seen in the interview, what development areas have come out, and what solutions we can come up with for the development areas. And that's where typology, I find, comes in very, very handy for understanding the person, sifting through the noise. We have certain psychometric tests as well we give to people. We have been using the Hogan Personality Inventory and Development Survey, which gives you a good sense of people's traits, almost Big Five style traits, but also the development survey is more about the dark side traits, the ones which are likely to lead you to derail. Like things like, if you're overly suspicious or skeptical, or you're a perfectionist, the point of it no longer being practical, or you have mood swings or anything like that. And you utilize these different lenses to really build, hopefully, an insightful picture of a person and talk with them to find good solutions. I was talking to an SLE a few months ago, that sort of a female SLE, I think in her early 50s. We're talking about how to sort of restructure, but find the right kind of role for her. She's the sort of person who needs to be in the thick of things and sort of have a job to do it, then move on. She's not the sort of person to hang around in peacetime. Otherwise, she could start winding people up or she'll just get too frustrated. She needs to be almost like an A-team, where you sort of parachute her into a particular part of a large international organization. She solves the problem and she gets out of there. And I was talking about this is kind of the role you need. And you need to try to create sort of a structure for that kind of role so that you can actually deliver the maximum value you can to this bank.
Now, are you helping her to find a role within the company to do that?
I'm not sticking with them. So the nature of this role is we're not, in this particular organization, we can't actually do the coaching. We're not on the list of coaches. We're on the list of promotions and recruitments. So in that particular case, no. So I do have a feedback session. That's basically where it ends. There's lots of HR stuff and, which contract is agreed for what to do, and there are different groups competing.
So why do you like the follow-up, the feedback session the most?
Because when you're talking to the person, you're not trying to catch things out. You're just having an open conversation, and you get to solutionize with them. One thing I'm
In
very
other
good at
words,
doing is,
the stress is off.
yeah,
They're now really dropped their guard. Now it's a real conversation.
yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. Sometimes feedback sessions can be very dangerous for you, more often than them. It's been a rare occasions where there's something wrong with said person. Usually, could be mental health related. Could be that they haven't got this role and they think you're the reason they didn't get the role. That can get quite tricky, and you've got to be very careful. So it's not always a walk in the park. Some can be quite challenging, but by and large, I'd say over 90% of the time, it's a genuine delight to have this conversation. These are very smart people at the pinnacle of what they're doing. I find it's an utterly delightful use of my time.
And it strikes me as you enjoy the connecting with the people so much, because the
Well,
part
I
I was
enjoy
going
the
to say,
solution. I enjoy the solutionizing with them. I enjoy talking to them, finding out about them, and
mhm.
helping to come up with solutions.
As you mentioned, the first part of it, you give a report, you send. Oh, are you still there? Oh,
Yeah, but I'm still
there we
here.
go. Okay, all right. The you give your report and you send it up, and in a way, you kind of know that most of the time the uppers already have something in mind anyway. This is just a little icing on the cake that they may accept or not or whatever. So, in a way, it kind of means you have to accept the fact that your impact on the hiring and firing, what's going on, might be minimal, but that
Although it
doesn't
does
bother you,
depend. It does depend. Sometimes,
of
yes.
course.
When it comes to when it comes to promotions, normally, if they really, really want someone, they're not going to listen to us, and I've seen that. There've been other occasions where it's been instrumental. So there's one case where the candidate was recruitment. It's more often in recruitment, I'd actually say. In recruitment, the candidate revealed certain dodgy activities, something like covering up a dodgy deal by putting it next to a very sort of legitimate deal and getting both through. That's not going to fly in a bank. So we're talking about this, and drew attention to that, and he didn't get the job. They wanted him, he didn't get the job. So it really does depend. And really, the key aspect, the personality analysis is, what I like, but the reason for the role is that the bank got into trouble years ago for something going on, and now they have to, yeah, they need to make sure everyone coming in is of high professional integrity. So that's kind of what it's about. But when it gets to recruitments, what I really like, my favorite kinds of recruitment, are the ones where you've got multiple people for the same role, and then you basically give your briefing to the person who would be the line manager or hiring manager for the person entering
Mhm.
that role, to talk about, okay, which one is going to be the best one. Both very, very high performing candidates. And a good example is where I had two people. One of them, I'd say, was more polished, very, very hard worker, very, very effective at what they were doing. Um, the other one, less polished, I would say, but very analytical, had those sorts of leaps of insight. I'm thinking, what is the nature of this role? It's a very strategic role. So you have one person who's very sort of logistically brilliant, organized, very, very capable in what they do, um, but sort of had to learn the more strategic side. The other one's naturally strategic, but may require a bit more training to get up to the level which they need. So say, it's not a clear cut decision. Do
Mhm.
you want the one who has a natural talent set for what you need, but may need more training and development, and there are clear development areas here? Or do you want the safer choice, who also will never quite excel, or likely will never quite excel to the same extent in the strategic brief, which, when it sounds like, that's the key thing for that role. I think eventually, I'm not entirely sure what happened. They don't always clue me in, but I think they went for the one with the higher potential, and the other one I think was considered for a different role, which was more logistical. Because there's another thing: you got people who are very, very capable on paper, and yeah, are very, very effective. They do very competent, safe pair of hands, but they then sort of struggle when it gets to this sort of managing director role and becomes strategic, and you're managing multiple countries worth of banks under you, and or you're doing a particular function within the bank that's doing something across. It's sort of as the intersection of functions and also countries of banks. It gets very, very convoluted. So that's the part which I really enjoy, is talking things over, getting sort of a strategy in place or a solution in place.
Well, you certainly become a lot more impactful at that point. So it may seem obvious, but which types are going to be better at logistics in banking, and which ones are going to be better at strategic in banking?
Well, I encounter a lot of LSEs. It's sort of a Englishy kind of bank, so you're going to get lots of LSEs, and they're great. There are lots of them. They're very capable. Whereas if I'm encountering LIEs, I encounter them a fair bit as well, they often have a struggle because the bank, I'd say its culture is more Delta. Definitely a more Delta bank. Unlike the sort of American banks, which are a bit more beta or even just straight or gamma. But this is a more Delta, Englishy sort of bank. So the LIEs.
How are you differentiating that? I'm curious. How are you differentiating that? What makes a British bank, which Britain seems a little bit more Delta-ish overall as a country anyway.
Yeah.
But what else are you using to kind of say that it's a little more Delta-ish?
Well, okay. So there's a certain genteel and sort of behind closed doors way of talking about the rougher, tougher aspects. It's low key. The values are very much one of sort of, being nice, saying the right sort of thing to people, not going too heavy, not having, not saying aggressive things. Even the conversations, it's very sort of polite, very sort of measured in tone. Very much like that. There's still a desire you've got to work very, very hard. You've got to achieve things. You've got to be really, really working at it. There's a strong emphasis on integrity. And you talk to people who are, if I'm doing recruitment to people outside of a bank, people inside the bank, you can see the difference in terms of values. Those within, it's almost like a confessional. They're telling you almost everything about themselves. Because there's like, the culture is one way, you just tell people. You're open about your faults, you're open about your problems, you're not so much on your guard. And you see people coming in from outside, they're on their guard. They are trying to present a clear narrative to you, all that sort of thing. So it's interesting. It's this sort of open confessional style. And also I encounter so many deltas in the organization. Just a huge number, more than any other quadra is delta. Hardworking, good-natured, wanting to be better, wanting to improve, wanting to openly discuss all the sorts of problems, not being precious about that. That's really the key thing, and it shows up. And you hear them talking about sort of the gammas. The gammas are a bit sort of ferocious, at least to them, and don't quite have that sort of measured sort of give them the benefit of a doubt way of handling things. Also, the bank in general, it gets so caught up in regulations. And it's sort of regulation like, we need to do this as well as possible. We need to interpret this in a way that actually makes it as hard as possible for ourselves, just so we're doing the highest quality. So it's a very LSE sort of bank. And it can easily lose the wood through the trees. And another issue, the way it's set up, it's not so much an issue. It's set up in a very for a bank, quite flat. It's almost like an archipelago of different people and different islands, and they have to sort of build bridges across to get things going. When you've built those relationships, things move very effectively, but most of the time it's quite slow. It's quite clunky, and there's lots of things here and there. So there's lots of sort of logistical excellence, getting things done in a sort of high quality way, but less of a sort of red tape cutting, moving forwards at high speed drive, which the gammas are going to want to bring. And when I speak to gammas, they are often frustrated in the organization, but they're also, especially the LIEs, they're often quite got a brilliance to them, which is very valuable for what people are looking for these recruitments.
Yeah, just hearing about this red tape already drives me crazy. It's,
it goes hand in hand with a bank. It really does. You can't really escape it. It's a question of how you then interpret the regulation. You've got the regulation, you've got interpretation of said regulation, which then translates into policy of a particular bank. And so it's attitudes towards that that's quite important. How are you approaching this? Are you thinking, are you sort of running fast and loose with it? Which, people don't just break regulations. Basically, hardly ever happens. But that is the question of interpretation. How much do you go? How many people do you get on board? It's a sort of organization where you have to get like 10 different stakeholders to agree to anything before it moves forward. So lots of conversation before things move ahead. So it is designed to frustrate a gamma. But they need gammas.
Yep. It sounds like hell. Yeah. In fact, actually, one of the things that since I'm military, one of the things that I do see a lot is, of course, this balance between the types that do want to follow protocol, regulation. That's what it says. That's what we wear. These are the rules, etc.
Yeah.
Definitely one of those areas where I am not interested in that. It's like, it's fine. I understand we have some rules that we need. However, I definitely much more value those people who get it done. They figure out a way to make something happen. And even the ferocious ones, the old Patton-like kind of character, even though I know he's an SLE, but the old Patton-like sort of character that just says, get that out of the way. I don't care. Move. Let's go. Get this thing going. It doesn't matter. Throw this shit over the bridge. Let's go.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. And it's good. And when I see that, which, believe it or not, it's actually kind of hard to find in the military, surprisingly. But when you see that, I'm like, outstanding. Let's go. Like, so all the rules just like, ugh. Yeah.
I actually, I do occasionally speak to someone who's transitioned from the military to banking.
Oh God!
And
Is it an LSE?
Actually, no, not an LSE.
We're in suspense.
EII.
Wow.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. He was an officer. He wasn't in active service, right? It was more, it was not that time he actually went to war. A lot of it, very, very open, very confessional. Like, everything about him was discussed. He didn't present himself so well. There was no stylizing. It's literally very open. Here it all is to see. And this is a guy who had a lot of imposter syndrome, actually, a lot of self-doubt, which is quite common at least in men. In women, you get imposter syndrome all over the place. But at least for men,
makes sense.
It's usually the EIIs who still have the imposter syndrome. And yeah, he's a guy clearly very much about building narratives to work with people. Not so much of a whole factual logistical. He could do that, he can organize, but it wasn't his natural skill set. It's really interesting. You find EIIs in all sorts of interesting areas. Dostoevsky actually joined the army. I think he actually did see active service. But it's interesting, that sort of desire to sort of grow and develop yourself and to not feel limited.
But did he do it voluntarily, or was he a drafted, conscripted Soviet soldier?
I'd need to look into the history. I can't. I don't know. I don't know.
See, to me, that would make a bit of a difference there.
I have a feeling it was voluntary. Let me just check with Dostoevsky. I know when it comes to George Orwell, I think was I.E., that was entirely voluntary. He believed in what he was doing. Let's take a look. No, I think George Orwell actually managed to kill anyone. I think he nearly got shot himself. Let me
Now
see.
you got me curious about this. Like, what in the world?
Oh yeah, George Orwell joined was fighting in Spain with the communists against the fascists. Let's see. What did Dostoevsky do? Youth, career.
I could see that. And Orwell as a IEE.
Oh no, here we go. You're right. He was okay. He was after he was released from prison. He was forced to serve in the Siberian Army Corps. So why did he end up in prison? He ended up in a prison camp of hard labor. Why? Can't remember.
What year are we talking about?
He was part of the Petrushevsky Circle. And this was back in between 1849 and 1854.
Okay. Better than I
Yeah,
thought.
no, it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't like 20th century stuff. It wasn't Soviet. This was before the Soviets. Yeah.
Nonetheless, that would make more sense. He was kind of pushed in.
So he was involved with the Petrushevsky Circle, which was basically Russian revolutionaries. Yes, he's with revolutionaries. Then he was sort of captured, forced to go to prison, and then forced to serve in the army after that. So yeah, that'll explain why.
Yeah, and it sounds a lot more sensible for an EII. It sort of did it, but not voluntarily.
Yeah, but again, it's like when it comes to an EII, it's in the British Army. The British Army is already quite Delta. It's different it's a difference. It's very much a place where you go to the army, you build character, you serve your country, you work as part of a team. Duty, being part of a team, is less so hierarchical. I mean, it's still hierarchy. It has to be an army. It's very much about going out, solving problems. You know, the killing people side is less common nowadays. Although saying that, I think he was around I think he was in the army during the Iraq War. But I don't think he actually saw active killing duty or anything like that.
Why are you making that distinction between active killing duty, as you call it?
Well, I'd be interested to see how an EII goes into the actual more violent, shooting side. I'm not saying an EII can't do it. I'd be interested to see what that would look like and what effect that would have. Basically, one thing I like to do is, through these sorts of interviews, collect experiences. And as I collect experiences, it allows me to add to my catalogue. It allows me to broaden it out. It allows me to build a better sense of nuance. But, yeah, for instance, not so much for interviews, but if you look at historical examples, and I've got some flack for it, for saying, for instance, that Bashar al-Assad, so sort of the bloodthirsty dictator, is actually an LII. Like, why would an LII be a bloodthirsty dictator? Well, look at circumstance. He is the son of a bloodthirsty dictator who I think was an LSI. He ended up in that position. All his dad generals around. He inherited it, exactly. And he himself wanted to became an ophthalmologist because he didn't like the sight of blood. So quite the opposite of bloodthirsty. A phobic of blood. But in a very unusual situation. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.
This is where I sometimes could see really typology also helping out for military psychologists. In some roles, they are acting kind of like recruitment as well, For certain type of organizations or units, they're also evaluating candidates, giving their assessment of what they think. But I could also see it being useful on the back end for therapy, PTSD, individuals coming out of various whatever conflicts or issues and so on like that, and what they just need some kind of counseling, and potentially just understanding their type may also help. I kind of wonder in some cases too whether it ever pops up that somebody would sit there and go, well, he's SLE, he's perfect, although he might enjoy killing people too much. We might need to keep an eye on that.
I think.
What about education?
Education. So,
no, go ahead. You finish your thought.
At the moment, I'm sort of leaning more into education brief in my local community. I've sort of become the nominal sort of head of education. I haven't been formally voted in yet, but setting up, said like a Sunday school, not Sunday. It's actually going to be Mondays after school, but I've been sort of overseeing the education side. How socionics will become useful is less clear. What I have thought about in the past, but it would be very hard to pull off, is to organize classes around what logic a person's inclined to use. There's introverted logic or extroverted logic. I think there's something to be said about extroverted logical types being more in favor of learning information piecemeal rather than presented as a coherent but heavily summarized body of information. I think they'd rather be given just the full facts. Whereas types which are, say, extroverted logic blind, they need the summarized, coherent body of information. And it's hard to sort of give both. You could advise teachers to give both to appeal to different learning styles. So maybe that's one way of doing it. Or it's just literally organizing the classes around these different types. Over time, I think I've started to side more with the former rather than the latter. I think the latter is a bit sort of social engineering. Could be an interesting experiment, but I'd be hesitant to experiment too much with children in school. Yeah.
What's an example that you mean by piecemeal?
Right. Well, all the data, and it's all spread out. It's like you're you're sort of you're taken apart a sandwich. You've got your bun there, you got your tomato there, you got your burger there. All the information they're all facts, they're all true, but they haven't been arranged in a certain way. There's no framing around the facts. And the idea is that it's for you to decide how to utilize these facts in different situations. Which is why extroverted logic explanations are a lot longer. Whereas introverted logic explanations are usually more concise because the information which doesn't serve the narrative has been filtered out. It's been digitized for easier consumption, which is why also introverted logic tends to travel further than extroverted logic. That's why religions are a thing, why millions of people follow religions. It spreads far better than science does. Instead of science, what's spread has been an ideology around science, which is to trust the scientist like you trust the priest. But it's not the science. People have not read the various pieces of literature on Google Scholar because that takes a lot of time. And that's the point. Extroverted logic does not travel.
Can you be more specific, like a better example? Because I'm still struggling to see the piecemeal difference.
Right. So for you to get a good understanding of, for instance, the nature of, say, let's say the Middle East. Let's say you get a better understanding of the Middle East. You'd need to collect a lot of facts from various parties in the Middle East. You need to talk to people. You need to check their evidence against other accounts. It would be piecemeal. You can't just be presented with what's going on in the Middle East. You've got to go on a fact-finding mission across various various accounts. Sometimes a journalist can go and do that for you and go on that fact-finding mission. But then you wonder what the bias is when they present a very sort of clear picture which supports one side over the other side. It creates suspicion, because almost certainly there's going to be some kind of ideology, either one way or the other, that's shaping what information you're given. And it's probably not the full facts. So facts naturally are piecemeal. They naturally are lying around in lots of different places, and you gather them gradually. You get facts here, you get facts there, you put it all together, and then you sort of make a judgment. That's data. It's lying around. That's why I say it's piecemeal. But an ideology is not piecemeal. It's all lined up. All the ducks are in a row. And this is what it's pointing to.
Okay, so here's something I encounter a lot, and it sort of fits in with this Middle East analogy. Oftentimes I would have people that hated history class. Common thing I would run into. They hated history, and it's dates, it's names, it's events, so what? It's not personalized. I don't care. And it's all about people that died however long ago anyway.
Yeah.
And so a lot of them just either don't like it or they have a hard time remembering things and so forth. Whereas for me, I always found it to be, I always loved history. I didn't see it difficult at all. It was never hard to put something in chronological order.
Yeah.
Seeing how one events go from here to there, to there, to there. Seeing the significance of these people, what they're contributing, what they're doing, how this led to where we are today, where things are going. Yeah. Gathering dates, I wouldn't say it's not difficult either. Dates and names and so on, even if you sometimes fudge it, you forget, oh, what was the exact date this thing happened? It doesn't matter. I know the approximate time. Let's move on. So I don't, to me, if we were talking about how we make sense of the Middle East, I feel like it's not difficult to put the pieces together, put it in a timeline, put it in an orderly way, see where it's going. I don't need the facts from everyone. I just need the facts from a few people that are trusted. And generally, I feel like it's not difficult to discern who is trustworthy and who's not. In many cases, it's pretty to see who is left-leaning or right-leaning or biased in some way. So that's where the piecemeal example, to me, it's like, I don't know. I don't relate to that. I find it rather easy to put all those things together.
Sure. Then you find other people who find that's too much information. And they do. People get information overload. Especially when the information seems to contradict. It's not easy. To get a full picture could mean a several-hour explanation, as opposed to something you can tell me in 2 minutes. Why is that? Well, because if you're trying to decide which side is bad, that's the decision you want to make. Which side is bad? How can you form that sort of view?
Well, the first question there is, you're going to get into what is bad anyway. What's bad for you?
Well, that becomes a philosophical discussion.
Well, but it becomes inherent to that conversation, right? You'd say, so which side is bad? Well, it depends. Which side are you on? Okay. Now, from your point of view, on the other side is bad. Okay. What information do you want to know now? And like, I just see that as being rather easy.
It becomes circular. It's bad because you're on this point of view, and therefore everything which is done against this side of everything becomes bad. If you're looking at it from simply the data, you're not approaching it with a preconceived understanding of, or a rule in terms of what is bad. So you're not already upholding an ideology. If your ideology is anything that's against people X means that they are bad, that's already ideology in place. That's already a structure. But if you're going a bit simply from the data, and you're piecing together, okay, what was done here, what was done there, what was done here, what was done there, etc., and then you're building all that up. And sometimes that picture itself is often more complicated than people realize. You're going to end up in a situation where you've got a lot of facts. And the expertise of someone is based on how many different facts they have pulled together in their analysis. And it's not to do with what side that they are on. So when it comes to introverted logic, it's about, at the end of the day, is your conclusion lining up with what is deemed to be the correct conclusion?
I'm imagining like a geopolitical strategist. I know a few
Yeah.
of these that their services are to whoever's going to pay them. So to them, it's like, okay, who's bad or what's bad? Okay, which side are you on, and what goal do you want? Based on those parameters, now I can tell you whether you're going in the right direction or you're not. That's essentially bad or good.
I mean, if you would have had to have simplified the data quite a bit.
Well, sure, because after a while, it's like what you're describing, data.
Yeah.
Yes, but that also becomes irrelevant. That becomes meaningless after a while. The data has to get simplified before it becomes unmanageable. It's meaningless anymore. Um, example.
But that's the thing, like relevance of data is very much context dependent. And so, yes, within the context in a specific situation, you can push a lot of the data out of the pot because it's no longer relevant to this particular issue. And so you can find a subsection of the facts which are relevant. It's still a piecemeal collection hodgepodge, but what they have in common is that they're all relevant to the immediate demands of a situation. And even then, that is based on not only the demands of a situation, but priorities between conflicting demands. So not only do you have all the demands, you then have to choose out of demands what is the greatest demand, and that decides your decision. So you found your subsection of all the facts. So that's how sometimes extroverted logic gets to a clear, straightforward decision. But if you look at all the various demands, you got your unmanageable number of facts again. Still, you're right. It's not decided by ideology. It's not a clear-cut thing where you would then, in a different situation, reach the same decision. No, and what you'll find is that, say, an LIU or an SEE would strongly object to the idea of taking the decision made here and applying it to a different situation, because that is where ideology comes in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think I see your point on that one. But so anyway, back to education.
Yeah.
So again, so tell me more. What are you doing with the education side? And what's this position you said you just got nominated for exactly?
Oh, I'm sorting out. Basically, I'm sorting out the local Jewish community in Welwyn Garden City. I say sorting out, and we have a collection of also young people who are trying to have something which continues in the next 10 to 20 years, because it's all just going to die out unless something is done, some sort of community building. So getting like almost like an after school teaching thing, increasing synagogue attendance, building up Hebrew literacy, all those sorts of things. So I've taken on the education brief because that's the part I'm most passionate about. Other people taking on events, taking on, I think what else, marketing, that sort of stuff. And it's sort of bridging a gap between millennials and boomers, because there aren't many Generation X people. There are lots of boomers, a large number of millennials, but they're sort of very secular and uninterested. So it's about bridging that gap in a way and looking at what compromises will need to be made for that gap to be bridged. So it's a very interesting piece of extracurricular.
So you said already that you're paying attention to people's TI or TE for learning.
Yeah.
You know what? Let's put it this way. What do you recommend for people on that? So let's say somebody comes to you and their TE is mobilized or suggestive or something. How does that change for you? What do you tell that person?
Well, when it comes to someone who's extroverted logic oriented, I'm going to be focusing more on the particular demands of a decision that they're wanting to make, and giving them relevant data. When it comes to someone who's more introverted, logic oriented, they're going to want more general rules and principles. But normally what I do is I listen. In general, I just listen, figure out what they want, and give them what they want. So, but I think when it comes to a teacher, right, a teacher isn't listening to each individual, figuring out what they want and how to give it to them. The teacher's having to figure out how to present this information to a whole class of people of differing needs and capabilities. And that can be done in a more structured, summarized way. It could be done in a more going into a range of different situations and picking out what the facts are. So they got a hard task in front of them, but they won't necessarily please everybody. And some people won't learn as effectively from that data as others.
Are you developing techniques in the classroom for this?
No, I'm not. I'm not working with schools right now. I'm trying to set up a sort of an after school thing, but I'm not working with schools. I can't say that I'm in that space. I'm not an educational psychologist. I'm a business psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
I did do an educational psychology conversion degree, but no, I'm not. I need to go through other hoops to be an educational psychologist.
And you're not interested in going into education?
Well, it will mean doing a doctorate in educational psychology and then making a whole transition across. It'll be, yeah, it's not practical yet. I mean, I rather prefer to focus on doing a PhD around demonstrating the value of socionics.
Which, how would you go about that?
Well, first of all, you need to try to demonstrate that it actually is a something rather than a fake thing. To do that, I say you need to show, well, you need to design experiments that reveal the basis of psychological asymmetry. So, psychological symmetry, people who don't know what that is where people, by leaning towards one thing, lean away from the opposite thing. If you are an ethical type, you lean towards ethics, but you lean away from logic, etc., etc. Psychological asymmetry is the principle behind there being dichotomies, which is the basis of Jungian typology. So if you don't have a good empirical support for psychological asymmetry, you don't have empirical support for any of it, really. So that's what I like to see if I can tackle. How would I go about tackling it? So
that's the kicker.
Yeah, I've considered doing operationalizing. That means converting a construct, a thing to measure, right, into something that is measurable. So I'd like to operationalize the various information metabolism elements. Imagine if you have a extroverted ethics scale and an introverted logic scale. Imagine if you could design,
and you'd have to rank them or count in some way to demonstrate that that person is using more of it than something else. And then you'd have to demonstrate that it's coming at the expense of its opposite.
Yes, exactly. So you need to successfully design, right? You have to do tests in validity and reliability on 8 different aptitude tests. Then you'd have someone complete all 8 aptitude tests, and then you will calculate what is known as a Z score. Now, Z scores basically are, you take the raw score in each of these tests. The Z score, based on norm data information, tells you, how high or low you are in one test compared to another test. Are you actually doing very well in your extroverted ethics and not so well in your introverted logic? From looking at the Z scores, you can then say, right. So what we found is that when someone, out of all the rational aptitude tests, whenever they score highest in extroverted ethics, they'll score lowest in introverted logic. extroverted logic, and introverted ethics somewhere in the middle. You find that kind of pattern across, and you find that pattern for all the other ones. The same rules apply. You have your solid proof. Well, no, it's not really solid. You can't do that in science, really. You have very strong evidence to support the hypothesis that there is psychological asymmetry.
And how far along have you gotten on designing a test for that?
Yeah. I can't do everything at once.
Uh-huh. Well, how would you say any of this plays into neurodivergence? I have to ask or I'll be killed.
You'll be killed?
I'll be killed. I have a woman on the other side over there that will hang me if I don't.
I see.
Deep dive into neurodivergence in this.
Well, let me think. I have dyspraxia, so I probably would fall under the banner of neurodiversity, although I don't know, the word neurodiversity gives me shivers. But
why?
I don't know, this idea, oh, look at all of us. I'm dyspraxic, I'm dyslexic, I need a special umbrella to fall under. It becomes like it's like it's a condition turning into an identity thing, and it like gives me the shivers. I don't know. I would probably, someone would say I'm neurodiverse, but I wouldn't call myself neurodiverse. I'm like I'm like Douglas Murray, you know, and he's gay, but he wouldn't say he's part of the LGBT group. You know, he just doesn't, you know, I'd rather not, I don't know. I would say that when it comes to neurodiversity or just various brain conditions which are different from the norm, I would say that there can be links to type. It depends on what it is. It really depends on what it is, because neurodiverse by its very nature is diverse. There are probably lots of different unrelated things being packed under neurodiverse, because all it means is that your brain works differently to the norm. And that can be debilitating, or it can be a mild quirk that you can talk about at parties. So it entirely depends what it is. If we're talking about dyslexia, well, I'm a dyspraxic ILE. I know another ILE who's a dyslexic ILE. And so his skill set's actually quite different to mine. He actually gets a lot more stuff done in the moment, which I'm not very good at, but I'm far more articulate, especially in conveying quite complicated concepts. So my mind works more verbally. He actually thinks more by doing. So that is a difference between people of the same type. And I'm pretty sure he is an ILE. I couldn't see him being any other type. So now there are other kinds of neurodiversity. It's a sort of label which almost anything can fall under it. A psychopath could be a neurodiverse, as an example. Another reason why I find these labels weird. You want to group me with the psychopaths? I don't know, of the people who have a sexual attraction to snails. You know, that's probably a neurodiverse thing as well. I don't know. So
French.
Oh, probably French. I think they just find them tasty. It's a purely a taste thing. But
well, we don't really know what they do with them all the time. Now,
that's fair. Well, what goes on in those kitchens, I have no idea. Whatever comes out is tasty though. But yeah, I don't know. This is why when you ask me what neurodiversity and personality, you need to be more specific. I could specify some more. Let's say we're talking about personality disorders, because this is what I find quite interesting. It's the interlinkage between type and personality disorders.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not ready to say that all personality disorders are clearly mappable onto certain types.
Of course.
What I would be willing to say is, for instance, you're looking at an LII versus an ILI. I think that the ILI, on a bad day, the ILI is going to lean far more towards schizoid personality disorder. And I think that the LII, on an equally bad day, is going to lean far more towards the avoidant personality disorder. And I would say if you are talking to someone you think might be an ILI, and they're showing avoidant characteristics, maybe think they're an LII instead. And
what would you say for EII? What do you think?
Oh, I haven't thought it out as well. Not yet. What I would say is this. I think there can be a leaning towards dependent personality disorder in the EII, which is also interesting because I'd also say that EIIs want to be self-sufficient, but they're not, and they're heavily reliant on certain other people they think to have expertise to give them the facts that they know are relevant and can use. And often going to other people and asking them, yada, yada, yada. Imposter syndrome, I've encountered in just about every EII I've talked to. So that's another thing. I would also say, I'm wondering if there are a number of personality disorders that have gone unrecognized because they are associated with Delta. Because I think it's very easy to look at Beta and identify personality disorders. I don't think there are many Delta personality disorders, but I think they do exist. I think if you work with Deltas, you're going to quite quickly find there are certain kinds of problems. You just can't pin it down to what's on the DSM-5 or the ICD.
You know what? I agree with you, and that's something I've been thinking about for a while. And I had the same conclusion that finding obvious disorders or issues with Delta seems to be a lot more difficult.
Yeah,
even Gamma a little bit as well, but Delta the hardest. Beta seems to be the most obvious, but I guess that's because everything with Beta is over the top.
Yep.
Nothing is ever subtle with Beta.
Cluster B. Cluster B is basically people looking at Beta. So you got histrionic, you got antisocial, you got narcissistic, you got borderline, you got lots of stuff there. Yeah, you can easily paint a lot of that stuff as Beta. Cluster A, you can find some ILI, I think shows up as schizoid. Schizotypal matches quite well, I'd say, onto IAI. And yeah, I said cluster C includes avoidance, which I think LII works with. I think also, to be fair, obsessive compulsive disorder is an interesting one, which I've found. Well, I say I've found. I can't say it's based on any sort of solid data, but I suspect that it links up to what I call the exacting side of Ranian dichotomy, which would be strategic in the conventional terms, but I don't think it means strategic at all. I call it exacting, which is inert sensation. And I haven't seen people with OCD much who have contact sensation. That's just a little theory I have, a hypothesis, not a theory.
You know, I would say that what I have seen that probably comes to mind is SI. I see Flow State was mentioning OCD, SI glitch, and it's like, yeah, that's probably what I've actually seen.
Well, but here's the thing, right? But this is where inert contact becomes so valuable, because you can see similar things in EIEs, LIEs, even SLEs and SEEs. You can see it in LIIs and EIIs as well. Very different types, very different. But you can see certain fixations on things needing to be a certain way in their immediate space.
Give us an example.
Oh, look at Donald Trump. Look at how his attitude towards handshakes and double dipping. I've known examples of EIEs with misophonia. Certain sounds freak them out. My sister, I think, very clear example of an EIE. She's the one who's a star at the moment. She's in a musical ride in not just off the West End. She's in the Southwark Playhouse at the moment. She can't bear it if I chew in her mind too loudly. Things like this. I've seen to find it a lot in the various types who have inert sensation, regardless of whether they value introverted sensation or not.
How would you use it in other quadras or see it in other quadras? I feel like betas are just so obvious about everything that it's an easy thing to go to.
No, fair enough. I mean, EIIs, very particular, something about where things are placed in their kit. Just something to move that can freak them out. Same thing for LIIs. Whereas I find with LSEs and ESCs, they're very good at sort of chopping and changing in their space. Sure, they need things to eventually have its right place, get the most functional use for it. But they don't like freak out, they just put it back in its place. They'll find it. They'll sort of, it's not a, they don't need the space around to be a certain way. And if you suddenly change the environment on them, it becomes more intense, or it becomes less comfortable, they have to sleep on the floor one day, they're just going to sort of rough it out. With an EII, in the same way as an EIE, if you suddenly change up the physical environment without it being on their terms, they will get upset about it. Even an SLE, if you change the SLE's environment not on their terms, they'll get pissed. SEE will get upset about it. It's like, it's about it needing to be on their terms.
I feel like I've seen that more with types that I would peg as ESI, EI, IEIs, but not a very healthy ones. Those are when I've personally seen it. So that's just my.
No, fair enough. I mean, I've known IEIs to not try lots of new foods and be very narrow in what food they'll have. But it's almost a sort of a lack of interest in going outside of what's familiar to them. And if you were to sort of make them do something, they'd actually yield to it. So it's not really, it needs to be on my terms. It's more, I'm just not really venturing out and exploring that thing, and I have no interest in doing so.
Something to think about there.
Mm.
On the neurodiverse topic,
yes,
one of the arguments that I get into on a near daily basis is, and again, arguing predominantly with my wife on EII. And for her, it's hilarious in that she thinks everything is neurodiverse. She's constantly pointing out that right there, that's a that's an ADHD thing, or that's autistic. That's happening right there. And then I'm arguing with her that it's like, well, everything is autistic with you and so on. And then the argument circles back to the same thing, which is you don't have enough definitions. It's not clear enough. It's too loose, and that's why everything after a while becomes neurodiverse. So what's the point?
Yeah. You know, I get you. I get you.
And that's where the battle rages on constantly. Yeah, just one of those topics that she's very interested in dealing with, and it's just sorting it out. Like, okay, you want to make this a thing, but let's work on how do you want to define it. And at some point, you need a real definition, because otherwise, this is irrelevant. It's everything. Everybody's everything. So there are literally times where we're arguing something. I'm like, I'm just describing what this type is, the socionics type. Yeah. And then she'll turn around. It's like, well, that's an autistic thing. Well, maybe it's just a type. So now which one is it? Is it just a type and their usual inclinations towards something, or is it a neurodiverse thing? Neurodiversity, are they just tracking types without realizing it? Becomes the question.
I've wondered about that question myself. If I think of someone who I think is, you know, the most articulate example of someone who is autistic. And when I use autistic, I'm saying someone who is profoundly autistic, not just sort of somewhere on the spectrum where you're leaning a bit more compared to someone else, which is sort of been how things have been reimagined now. It's all about spectra. So everyone's everything. Everyone's a little bit psychopathic. Everyone's a little bit autistic. Everyone's a little bit this and there's a bit that, right? Okay. If we're talking about, okay, someone who's autistic, properly autistic, look at Temple Grandin. She is properly autistic. right? She grew up without a broad brush view on things. She had to build up her understanding of the world entirely bottom up. The slightest change in her environment, and it's a completely different environment. You, let's say, you move a cup, suddenly the world is changed entirely. She sees everything in terms of very specific pictures. That, I would say, is a profound understanding of what it means to be autistic. And I say a lot of the people saying they're on the autistic spectrum do not relate to that way of viewing things. She was someone who struggled so much with sudden changes, she needed to almost have a sort of machine apply pressure to her sides, almost like a cow, because she realized she could apply it to cows as well, which made her so useful in talking about livestock. She's an expert on livestock behavior. But she was almost an extension of her own autistic experiences and how what is actually soothing to create a sort of very sort of familiar, low stimulation environment. So that is what I'd say. That person, I say, is an example of autistic. Now, I'd also type that person as an SLI. So can I really extract out autism from SLI? I'm not entirely confident or sure. And there's a question of what is Asperger's as opposed to autism. Asperger's sounds to me to be someone who has a lot of the social awkwardness.
Well, Asperger's, as far as I know, just rolled up. Yes, it just kind of rolled up into autism.
Yeah, because basically there used to be Asperger's being like a mild kind of autism, but then there was autism. And later it's now become the autistic spectrum. So there's no place for Asperger's anymore. That just means, in general, somewhere on the autistic spectrum it's not right at the end. So, okay, I think there are perhaps two different things here going on. I wouldn't say that Elon Musk, for instance, is a bottom-up person. I don't think he needs to see, he sees every single picture as distinct from every other picture. You don't really put that into a spectrum. How do you lean towards that? You either need to do that and you're almost incapable of managing through a top-down understanding, or you're not. So again, I wonder about these categories. At the end of the day, these sorts of things, how they classify these different conditions, are based on observed traits in patients. And there may be errors in that in terms of what is put with what. Maybe they're comorbidities, and based on those comorbidities, certain things are clustered together. But you can have some of them. You might not have all of them. You have two people who share none of the same traits in common, but are given the same disorder. So there's a lot of piecemeal stuff going into this. And so the categories, perhaps not entirely appropriate. Maybe it's the case that once we have type and we developed our understanding of type, that would actually be more useful than simply saying you are autistic. But people like labels. And this is why that's why I get a bit of a heebie-jeebies around neurodiverse. Because I see it about, or going around saying, oh, I'm this, oh, I'm that. This is my identity now. And this is now my group I now have to defend the rights of, and I'll police people who talk about neurodiverse folk, or the neurodiverse community in that sort of way. Which is rubbish. There's no neurodiverse community. It's rubbish. But that's kind of the, it's easily becoming that kind of space, at least in recent years.
It can be seen as ironic, as you say, that people like labels, and that might be the same person that then says, I don't want to be put in a box in socionics. You can't type me, but I'll be put in a different kind of diagnosis box.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say with alexithymia and FI, the connection there?
Oh, hang on, alexithymia. So without words. So basically, that's how. Let me just check.
Like the inability to really know how you feel in the moment. It takes time for you to kind of realize this is what I'm feeling.
Oh, okay. Oh, there we go. Alex. Okay, no, I'm just making sure it's right. Okay. So I don't have the expertise to know what happens here. For instance, I'd be careful because I've encountered examples of autism in IEIs, which is strange. You think, well, I used the example of an SLI who's autistic. When I encountered an IEI, he seemed to have very little people skills, but seem
Mhm.
to have even worse logic. So applying this out to something like alexithymia, I think I need to talk to some people who have alexithymia to really know if they, yeah, if there's any sort of pattern there in terms of type. I could spitball at you, which is to say, it's a certain blindness in terms of one's own emotions. Are those emotions actually moods, or are they attitudes? I don't think they've necessarily made that distinction. It's about how you are made to feel in the moment, or
Mhm.
is it more um, recognizing what you like, what you don't like?
Right.
So
So
you've
in
separated that out. I can't talk about it in a
well,
coherent way around introverted ethics or extroverted
the
ethics.
conversations that I've gotten into on this is for an FI dominant or FI base who can clearly they know what they like, they know their
Mm,
attitude towards things, they're consistent and it never changes. But when it comes to what is the mood, what are you feeling right now? Can you express yourself openly what you're feeling now?
yeah.
That's where they'll stumble and say, well, I'm not really sure what I'm feeling or how to explain it. It might take me some time to sort of emote that I'm feeling. You're saying,
Mm,
okay, and now comes this conversation of is this alexithymia or is this a very common thing we're going to find with some FI dominant types, particularly
yeah.
EIIs, for example?
Yeah. I think this is going to be a logical type. So I'm almost certain it's a type which leans more toward. And what they clearly say as well, it's interesting. Few dreams or fantasies due to restricted imagination and concrete, realistic, logical thinking, often to the exclusion of emotional responses to problems. So this is suggesting to me a logical sensory type. And that's perhaps why it also is highly prevalent amongst individuals with the autism spectrum disorder. Right? It's interesting that so alexithymia has high comorbidity with autism, and autism is has been described by Simon Baron Cohen as being linked to a high systemizing quotient and a low empathizing quotient. And systemizing, it's very much ST land, you could say,
Mhm.
right? Very masculine, also connected to being more masculine, more male. Men tend to have higher SQ and lower EQ. So it's all leaning towards ST and the absence of NF in general.
Right. But then that would imply that somebody who is NF and would claim to have such condition that would not follow. It's like, well,
Yeah,
the way we're
it would,
interpreting this, you can't be an NF and have these kinds of issues. So it
it
must be
would be
something else.
it would be very strange. So if you have someone who's an NF and they claim to have alexithymia, right? What is perhaps causing it? Is alexithymia a psychological asymmetry problem, or could it be an example of a particular brain damage? Let's
Oof.
say someone has no. Let's say no. Let's say an example, right? Let's say someone has the otherwise neurotypical profile of someone with IEI, who's an IEI. But let's say a particular part of the brain has basically been shut off as well, perhaps due to an injury, perhaps due to some sort of genetic quirk, whatever it is. That part is simply not working. It's not that the brain is actually structured differently. It's that they're structured as it otherwise normally, but something's not working. So let's say someone who was neurotypical and they had a car crash, and suddenly they can no longer control their behaviors because their prefrontal cortex has been damaged.
Mhm.
So that is an example of, a brain damage rather than an alternative brain wiring. So it wouldn't actually fit under what is described in a sort of utopian understanding of neurodiversity, where these are all different brains. Yet this is a different brain in that it's exactly the same as normal brain, except that that particular thing is actually no longer working. It would have been working if it weren't for some sort of injury which happened. So in that case, you could create the symptoms of alexithymia in an NF type. And for the purpose of diagnostics, that NF type would be no different from the ST type, except that they won't have all the associated things you'd have with an ST.
Well, I get the logic there, but in reality, from what I've seen with a few people that I would say are definitely not suffering from brain damage, there's no trauma to speak of. There's no overuse of drugs to speak of.
Yep.
Clearly not logical types. Never have been. There's just no way you could mistake that. There definitely would be a feeler. And yet would claim to have alexithymia-like issues. So something else is amiss there. Something is to look at.
There could be an articulation problem. Is it the recognition or experience of emotion? Or is it a problem giving that articulation?
I feel like it's the former, but I'd have to clarify.
It's like it becomes complicated. There are certain areas of the brain where, if damaged, the person can't actually articulate what they are thinking. And they'll speak to you and they think they're making total sense.
Yeah.
And you're listening to them. No, you're speaking absolute gibberish, complete gibberish. Not just the way an IEE can speak gibberish, but just actual gibberish. So there is that issue. So it becomes very, very complicated. What exactly is going on? How is it being measured? And it's hard to tell because if someone's never experienced emotions, how would they be able to know what it's like to not experience emotions? They don't know the difference. All we have is what they can articulate to us. So we wouldn't be able to know if it's actually an experiential problem or an articulation problem. This is where it gets very, very confusing and very, very complicated. And I'm not sure how to really demonstrate that except by putting them in an fMRI, assuming that you can map it to a particular part of the brain, which itself becomes more complicated the more and more you look into it.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely some more stuff I'll be talking about. All this little neurodiversity things, because apart from these complications, and I do think that sometimes maybe some of the things that get diagnosed might just be a type thing. This is your person. This is what we would view in socionics. That's just your type. That's how it is. But there's also things that get just kind of mixed up. So there's always the classic, like, I have ADHD, or if you're an NE dom, you need to appear ADHD-like and be bouncing around everywhere.
Yeah.
Or even SE types. And then you start asking that question, well, is there a correlation between ADHD-like behavior and actually being an NE dom?
So saying it gets very complicated. I lean towards the view that there are different layers. So I think there's type. I think type carries certain psychological asymmetries anyway. And I think that with maladaptation can lead to a number of personality disorders. But potentially a very maladjusted SLI could actually be a kind of autistic. Maybe that is what a large number of the conventionally understood to be autistic people are. I don't know. Then you could have people who have a type, but due to some kind of other kind of damage in the brain, as I described, they got another problem sitting on top of it. You could have someone who acts very differently because a tumor is developed in their brain and is pressing on a certain kind of lobe. And that can create behaviors which could look like a condition which comes about through some other means. And so that's where it gets really, really complicated. When talking about this IEI I was speaking to, who said he was autistic, and I could see there's a problem here with with how you use your ethics. And normally I type you as a logical type, but I can see you have no logic either. It was a very difficult person to type because the normal signs I'm looking for aren't there. But in that case, I say perhaps this is someone with a type profile of an IEI, but there's something else pressing on the brain or something else not working in the brain, which normally would be working to lead to this effect, which we've called autistic. And we have no way of reliably telling how all autistic people are alike, because we don't. Instead, we talk about, this is why we talk about the diversity, because it is so diverse, which means you can't group them together.
Yeah, which at least in the case of a few of those typing sessions, you have somebody who is kind of telling you ahead of time, I have such and such condition. So now you know to be aware of that and look and find a way around that problem. The challenge, of course, comes when they don't mention that, or maybe they don't know.
That's a very good point. Maybe I should add that to the pre-diagnostic questionnaire. Yeah, I think I'll do that, actually. That's a good point, Jason.
I thought you were already doing that, actually, but
no, I just hadn't. Normally, people, where it's come across, people just mention to me in advance.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've just watching certain typings, me typing myself, different people. I mean, it's just an obvious barrier that if someone has some kind of an issue and they don't disclose that, it's going to cause problems. You're looking for certain markers and you're not finding them, and then they seem to be 3 different types at the same time. And little did you know, it's because, well, they have some particular issue.
I've had a couple of examples. So I had an example of the person who was autistic. I had an example of the person who had basically a kind of brain damage, and there was something wrong with, and that took a number of sessions. But in both cases, they're very upfront about their difficulties. Other than that, where have I encountered problems? It's usually been either because, well, either they have an idea they're one type when actually they're not that type, which can happen. There have been, I've had one case where someone was drunk or on drugs during an interview. They're not going to tell you that in advance. So I haven't encountered the problem yet, but I definitely see the potential for that problem.
Well, I would say that perhaps you haven't encountered it that you're aware of.
Maybe.
I would even venture to say that there's a few people that you've typed even online that I've seen, and I've seen them running around afterward, and it's just, you're kind of looking at them like, you have something else. And a few of them will admit it. I'm not just, diagnosing them myself. A few of them, they'll admit it later on. But if they don't tell you that ahead of time, or if they don't know, it's going to likely lead to a mistype.
Well, there is also the problem that they might simply not know, and I wouldn't be qualified to be able to diagnose them either. And that also becomes complicated. So I do agree it is worth me actually putting that in my pre-diagnostic questionnaire. That won't get rid of the problem entirely.
This brings me to something I pondered about, another opinion piece.
Yeah.
So, generally speaking, in typology, especially socionics, being that it's very TI heavy, it's very NT heavy, it's obviously very nerdy stuff. Many of these types come to this because they're not very good with people. They know that, and they want to figure out a way to get better with people. And having a logical framework provides something for them. However, I wonder sometimes the challenges that may arise for types that are FI polar, FI suggestive, or otherwise have very poor feeling sides to them in their ability to sort of like do interviews and watch people and just kind of get that vibe, get that sense that you can pick up on someone and go, something is wrong, something is off. Whether that be person could have a condition, a disorder, or maybe somebody is being disingenuous, whatever. I wonder if being FI polar or FI suggestive or something like that is a problem.
Most likely. It's one reason why I have said that If someone's going out to deceive me, they're probably going to deceive me. I'm not a natural good reader of people's intentions. Never will be. But I think I also need to think about what is the purpose of my service.
Mm-hmm.
Is the purpose of my service to be a benchmark for people to look at in terms of, oh, Jack typed that person that, therefore they must be that type. And are people coming to me for the purpose of getting the stamp of approval of them being said type? If that's the case, people will use and abuse me. If it's the case that instead they're coming to me for the sake of us, because of a sincere desire to understand themselves better, that where it's not in their best interest to deceive me, to obscure information, where they're going to be forthcoming as much as possible with information, and if they think they could have anything, wrong with them, they would proactively tell me because they want to get the most accurate typing possible. Then that's when I'm going to be at my best. So that is really the purpose of me. I'm not someone you should go to get your stamp of approval. If you think that my typing is going to change everyone's mind about you, you're most likely wrong. People still believe what they believe about you. They just say that I'm a bad typist. So really, it's my service is for people who want to benefit from knowing their type. But yeah, some people will pay me money so that they can get what they believe is a stamp of approval, but it does not function as such, and it shouldn't function as such.
I wonder, like, do you have a methodology that you've sort of put together over experience that you've just kind of said, you know what, I'm not a good judge of character, I don't sense these things well, but I can try to find a system that I can utilize that helps me to sort of weed through this a lot better and thus compensate for that deficiency, let's call it?
The one thing I can reach for is inconsistency. If someone's contradicting themselves, maybe that's the case them trying to deceive me. More often, though, it could just be that they're a type that contradicts themselves, which I've also had. I don't know if it's a good way of knowing. I mean, if I were to do, for instance, if I were designing a psychometric test, I could throw in social desirability items. Those are items where you ask questions like, how much do you agree with this statement? I never lie. Everyone lies. So if you say I never lie, you strongly agree with that statement, you're probably lying.
Yeah.
So you could use things like that, potentially. But again, like, the purpose of what I'm doing is, for me, my focus is on my client. If someone's paying me, I'm at their service.
Right.
So the idea of me looking and trying to catch them out gets in the way of that relationship. That's not what I'm doing. I'm not the arbiter of what everyone's type is. I am a service. I am providing a service to help people to work out their types with me.
Do you ever try to use someone like Rita or others who are more intuitive about these kinds of things to sort of double check, let's call it?
On a rare occasion, I've had Rita come along and help. But if I were to make a system where I include Rita on things.
Well, obviously not just her specifically, but someone who maybe is better in that arena that you can kind of trust and go, listen, I think that this person is SEI. What do you think? Did I miss something here or what? And that person can look and go, I'm getting that.
It raises issues of confidentiality. I need to get, first of all, permission. It'll need to be a case-by-case basis. And on occasions I have, even in the public interviews, because most of my interviews aren't public, But even the public ones, I've had, for instance, someone interviewed with their brother or a family member just to check if what they're saying is actually backed up, and it was. That was the particularly difficult person to interview, because I think because of the brain damage.
Yes.
So there are rare situations. Most of the time, I don't usually think, oh, there's something really fishy here. Sometimes, a recent example, there's someone I interviewed, and they then shared that video, and people in the community knew them, who'd known them to be basically role playing, or believed them to be role playing, piped up and said, "Oh, this person is actually role playing or LARPing as this other type, whatever else it is," and I can tell you the reasons why. You know, it becomes a whole sort of load of drama. But I have no way of reliably telling things apart. I could, and even if I could, what value would that bring?
Yeah, it's the focus for me. It's less on community drama and people inevitably fighting with each other. You know, like it's inevitable. Who cares? But I just find it interesting. It circles back around to where this all begins, right? So, what is the practical value of typology or socionics, particularly for types who feel that they're very strong in FI and maybe FI and intuition and this combination? They feel that they're already good judges of character, of people, and so on. And to them, they're like, well, what do you have to offer? Why should I bother to learn this complicated system that takes time if I'm already good with people? I mean, leave that to some nerdy NT who doesn't understand anybody. You know, and this seems to me to be kind of at the core of typology. It's the question that is central to anyone in typology, regardless of what system you play with. What is your benefit? What are you providing? Can you provide something, okay, to the NTs who maybe don't get people well? All right, we got that. But what about the NFs who feel like they're already good with people, or even SFs who feel like they're good with people and they don't like all this nerdy stuff anyway? So it's like, what are we doing for them?
Well, do we need to do something for everyone?
I would like to think so.
I think where it helps NFs in my experience, it's less about getting a read of other people. It's more about finding out a chart or path for their own growth and development, and knowing what paths are actually right for their development, what paths were pushed onto them by society, by social orders, physical demands. I think helping them to articulate that journey, in the case of B2NFs, building more of an identity around the type, which ends up happening, or with Delta NFs, helping to specify areas of growth and improvement. Both of them are seen to be quite valuable by those types. But it's less about figuring out people, because they seem to be absolutely fine at that. That's what I would say. I mean, I've known SFs to use socionics very well. I know one SF who used it to help her find her fiance. So it does benefit a range of types, just often in different ways.
I mean, I would agree with that in general, but the piece is really putting that out there, articulating that well, in order to have that answer ready to go. Normally, and I'm sure you've had this experience, I'm sure everybody has, where you're out and about and you run into some people and you're talking to them, and then you somehow roll into your socionics conversation, and then they look at you like you're insane. And it's like, why would you do that? Why? What does it matter? And then now we have to enter in this conversation. Okay, well, what does it matter? Does it matter? Or are we just wasting time? Like, what are we doing here? And okay, how can I prove to you that I can find something for you and your type that maybe you would care about? And then now let's get into that.
I used to find people thought I was insane, usually in university. I think since becoming a psychologist has become far less frequent.
You have the title to sort of back it up.
It's pure perception, really. Okay, fine. Okay, it's not pure perception. I have gained experience, I've gained maturity, etc., etc. But yeah, but I think saying you're a psychologist, I think, does help a fair bit as well.
Right. Gives you the benefit of the doubt that somebody might say, well, maybe he's a professional, he might know something, so let me give him another 5 minutes.
Yeah. But okay, what I often do from talking to someone, I do tap into what are they interested in. So when it comes to an LIE, I'm going to, of course, make it more practical. I'm going to make it more appropriate to the goals which they're pursuing. Often with an LIE, it is about relationships. They often want to find that person they can actually trust. And often it's helpful to articulate to them that you need a kind of person who makes their trust implicit in their actions, and someone who is reliable, someone who isn't going to say one thing and mean another, and someone who sees you for who you are, to the point where you can be far more matter of fact and drop the act of being sort of socially conducive. So if I speak in those terms, that usually appeals to LIEs quite a bit. So, I have found from multiple experiences with different people, different types, I've kind of learned how to talk about this topic in a way which is appealing to them. Perhaps not for all types. Some types more than others. I end up talking to a lot of LIEs. I end up talking to quite a lot of IEIs. LIIs a lot as well.
Basically the art of salesmanship.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say I'm a great salesman. I have no special skill.
No, but nonetheless, this is kind of what you're doing in a sense. It's okay, what do you want? What do you, the customer, care about? And how do I tailor this to meet the needs that you want? And now sell you.
That's a fair point. It comes from my consulting. What I am is essentially a consultant. But I wouldn't say I'm especially skilled in converting that into sale. I'm more skilled at the moment at listening and coming up with solutions. But I guess that loads quite a bit onto salesmanship as well.
Yeah, I would say you still have to sell them on the idea and sell them on what this is and how it's useful to you and why you should bother. So to me, you are selling something. It's 1 a.m. over there, isn't it?
Yes. And I've got I think it's like a 7 o'clock wake up.
That was the SI call there.
Yes, and that's because I've agreed to do the mornings with my son. So my wife gets to sleep in.
How is parenting?
It's challenging, but how else would one describe parenting? It is challenging. It is rewarding, but everyone's going to tell you it's also rewarding. Do I have any words to tell you that you might not expect? No. It's kind of what one would expect. And the thing to always expect is that, and what everyone will tell you, is that you cannot prepare for it. And you can't.
Do you find it difficult? The adjustment here.
Now it's quite easy. Well, no, it's not easy. Easy compared to how it was. It was excruciatingly difficult because for the first few weeks, almost the first 2 months, he would not sleep in the side cot. He would sleep on top of us. And to begin with, because we were trying to ensure safe sleeping, that meant us taking shifts throughout the night, 3-hour shifts, with him sleeping on us, and us trying to stay awake while he slept on us. And after my 3-hour shift, it'd be the next person, and 3-hour shift, next person. So me and Zara would alternate. We had the benefit of family members to help out as well, but it was excruciating. And getting used to because I'm used to rather little sleep, as people may have guessed. I'm not used to broken sleep. That was a new thing for me. I'm used to having little sleep, then collapsing and sleeping and waking up several hours later. I'm not used to going for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks without, at any point, more than 3 hours at a stretch.
Mm. See, I'd like to say that for me, it wasn't really that hard, but that might be inaccurate. Then again, in my case, I have 2 kids, by the way.
Very good.
But then again, in my case, my wife is an absolute champion at this, so she probably takes on so much of the load that it makes it seem easier for me. So, yeah, it could be. But
I think that's often the benefit of.
I totally
having
don't know.
It cut off.
Were you at the birth?
I missed what you said there. Sorry, Jason.
Like, I'm going all personal now. Were you at the birth?
Oh yeah.
Present?
Oh yeah. I was. I experienced both viewpoints.
What a tactful way of describing that.
Oh yes, it's all right, dear. Oh my goodness, it's absolutely fine. Don't worry. Oh wow, I can see the head. My goodness, there's a lot of blood, etc., etc.
Were you squeamish by that?
Oh no, I cut the cord.
Oh, good. Thank goodness. I actually had. Well, the first time I actually was. It was just me and one nurse catching the baby coming out. So I was pretty much delivering my own child at that point.
Oh my.
And the second time was only mildly better.
Wow.
Well, my wife is very fast in labor. I mean, she pretty much shoots them out like cannonballs. So you got to be ready. You got to be on your toes. But one of the things that would annoy the hell out of me was how much the nursing staff always is wondering whether you're going to be that father who's going to pass out, or you can't bother to look at anything. And it would just annoy the hell out of me. It's just like, really, you're gonna bother? For God's sakes, just give me the thing. I'll cut it. Let's go. Let's move it. I found that aggravating.
It does. We had a very interesting birth. At one point, we were sort of rushed into the operating theatre. They said it was going to have to be a C-section. And after 10 minutes, they then deliberated. No, it's all right. And they moved her back into the birthing room.
How long was she in labor?
Oh, my goodness. So it all happened very, very quickly. Very, very quickly. So soon after being brought back into the birthing room, suddenly the dilation jumped up to 10. And then it's like, oh, the baby's coming. And after like half an hour, 40 minutes, it was done. But there's a lot of waiting around before that.
So So hold on a sec. So was it a scheduled C-section that then changed?
Or... No, we didn't schedule. We induced him because we were given information that he was huge and we need to get him out quickly. He wasn't huge. He was a whole pound less than what they suggested. I think the scans are very unreliable when it comes to the weight of the fetus. Yeah, no, it was a natural birth. We'd always wanted a natural birth. It's just that at one point there was like an emergency, and the lights, sort of the klaxons went off, and everyone rushed into the room, and suddenly she was gone. She was whisked away, and I had to put on this sort of all the scrubs and join her, because I think he got the umbilical cord caught around his foot, and that cut off the for a brief instant the oxygen. So that what made everyone very, very nervous.
Mm-hmm.
He was fine.
I'm also a physician assistant, so I've been through a lot of these births.
Well, that's probably why you were able to deliver it yourself.
I wasn't one at the time. Yeah, I wasn't one at that time. I became one later. Through emergency medicine stuff and all that later on. But it's one of those examples of like, yeah, I can do this. I have no problem with deliveries. In fact, it's kind of funny right now that we have an SLE who is saying he ain't cutting shit. All right. I wonder if that means you didn't like the blood or anything. The SLE is chickening out. Are you seeing this?
This is what I'm saying. This is exacting. This is inert sensation.
Well, guess I'm flexible.
No, it depends. I mean, it depends what's on your terms. It can vary hugely. If you're a type that has inert sensation or contact sensation, yes, what's on your terms, that can vary hugely. It's rather that whatever you tend to take a strong position on, if you've got inert sensation, it's going to be in the sensory aspect. What you actually take that strong position on specifically is a whole different matter. It may be blood for him. It may be, I don't know, pus for you. I have no idea what it is. It might not be bodily fluids. It may be sounds. It may be colors. It may be someone walking too slowly. It could be lots of different things.
Needles.
Yeah.
I don't like them.
No. Not many people do. I mean, they are kind of sharp.
Well, yeah. Well, I don't know. I know some people who actually don't mind it. They enjoy it. It's almost like they're masochistic about that. And to me, I'm like, I don't know. Maybe you just don't have any nerve endings. You don't feel anything. I don't tell you.
Oh, they're just a bunch of pricks. Yep.
Well, Jack, thanks for coming aboard and talking and chatting. I know it's late.
Absolute pleasure, Jason. Yeah, I gotta get some nap time. But thank you for having me on.
Until the next time, hopefully.
Until the next.
I'm sure we TE'd the crap out of everyone. Oh well, too bad for you all. So.
All right, take care. Have a lovely rest of your evening, Jason, and thank you everyone for tuning into Jason's channel. All the best. Bye-bye.